So first up, we have all the way from sunny Houston, Texas, where Dennise lives and works. Dennise Mannix from the Faculty of Education. Are you there, Dennise?
I am.
Yeah, hi, Dennise. Okay, so we have Dennise Mannix from the Faculty of Education presenting her work on the gathering of another feminist wave, a personal and PhD journey. So look, Dennise, just so you know, I'll give you a 2-minute warning about 13 minutes in.
Okay, no worries. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you well. And I know you're a pretty slick presenter, so, you know, you're probably timed to perfection anyway. But I'll just let you know, if you hear a funny noise at about 13 minutes in, that's me letting you know. Okay, we'll take it away, Dennise.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on your second day. I am in Texas, and so because of that, I wanted to acknowledge the local people. I want to acknowledge and pay respect to the people of the Akakisa, whose land I am on today. I pay respect to the past, present, and emerging elders, and the country that each of us lives on and is sustained by. I am mindful that within and outside the buildings, the country, the land always was and always will be Native American land. This acknowledgement is actually very, very significant. It carries this significance because of its importance to my study. As Gerda Lerner states, always what is accentuated is difference, where difference is turned into dominance and is the institution of patriarchal privileges of men over women. I use this slide in all my PhD-related presentations, and some not even for PhD, but relevant here in the US, because this is where the acknowledgement of this really has absolute relevance to my research. So let's have a brief reminder of my PhD inquiry. In essence, my PhD, as many of you or some of you may remember from previous years of praxis, is about what we learn through the stories of women and men pursuing their executive leadership careers in traditionally patriarchal workplaces, and there's a large number of those. The feminist concepts of power, agency, difference, and resistance are useful in this approach. My PhD was also to use the reflexive and deconstructive approaches of feminist post-structuralist discourse analysis, or FPDA, applied to my inquiry. A nice, neat package, so structured and ordered as a totalizing explanatory framework. In this time, though, between the time we last met in 2023 June, my story has indelibly changed. Since this last time, I have been dealing with ovarian cancer. I'm not cancer-free, I'm in remission, a critical distinction because this cancer has no absolute screening mechanism like other cancers. So cancer for me is likely to return with an over 95% chance of that happening. It has made the necessity of me finishing my PhD more urgent. In a major operation last year in October, following an initial 3 rounds of heavy-duty chemo, I had my insides literally removed, and I'm sorry for being graphic, but it's important to understand the context. My fallopian tubes, my ovaries, my uterus, a section of my colon, an 8.5-inch tumour, and even my appendix. And that was quite an undertaking. But I am still a woman and very much with my 2 feet planted firmly on the ground. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, as of a series of tests yesterday, I'm also 9 years into being cancer-free from breast cancer, having lost my native left breast in a mastectomy, and through an amazing feat of 10-hour surgery called a tram flap, had my breast reconstructed. Yet I am still a woman, and I am angry because over the course of the last 2 years, so much of what it has meant to be a woman, the hard-won gains, have been removed, destroyed, and irretrievably altered, particularly here in the US, although not specifically or solely. The importance of this period in my history and world history, my particular experience in the US, and my commitment to my role as president of a global nonprofit to elevate women and advance gender equity in the energy sector is not to be underestimated or sidelined. I am being afforded the opportunity for significant insights and clarity that not merely contribute to my feminist research, but that offer me a window into the watershed of an emergent next generation of feminism, or as Julia Gillard describes it, the gathering of another feminist wave. And for those of you who might be interested, yes, that is a middle finger, and I apologise for the crassness of it, but that colour that you see on my nail is actually teal, which is the colour of ovarian cancer. So I've looked at the first of my impacts, my personal story, very, very quickly, because it's been a long 12 months, I can tell you. So let's now look at the second impact on my PhD, the shifts that have been occurring. The shifts that have occurred in these recent times represent what can only be described as a watershed for women, power structures, and feminism. There's been a rise in right-wing misogyny and extremism, which is what I'm going to focus on as the major shift. It has a US perspective because this is where I live and I work, but it is a window to what is going on worldwide. So let's have a look at three things: the Dobbs decision, which is Roe v. Wade, as many of you may know, and the Me Too movement with Harvey Weinstein's overturned conviction, and someone called Harrison Butker's commencement speech. Let's go through them quickly. In June 24 of 2022, SCOTUS, or the Supreme Court of the US, overturned the constitutional right to abortion by a majority. It was held that this decision would have no bearing on other fundamental constitutional rights like marriage, same-sex intimacy, and contraception access. This decision heralded that the approach that almost exclusively was looking at reproductive rights from the lens of at least the mid-1800s. There was a dissent offered by 3 of the Supreme Court judges, and it was said in this dissent that it stripped women of all rights. It destroyed lives, it curtailed women's status as free and equal citizens, and most negatively, it impacted women of colour or limited means. Second approach is to look at the Me Too movement and the fact that in April of 2020, Harvey Weinstein was convicted with historic gains that were celebrated for the Me Too movement, which actually commenced in 2017. And it moved the cultural needle on attitudes about sexual assault. But what happened was when the conviction was overturned, it reopened a painful chapter in America's reckoning with sexual misconduct by powerful figures. And even like with the first example that I explained, there was dissent in the judge's decision. The decision endangered decades of progress, an incredibly complex and nuanced area after centuries of deeply patriarchal and misogynistic legal tradition. And then I thought I'd close this section with a quote from Ashley Judd, an actress and an early exponent of the Me Too movement, who had this to say: "This is what it's like to be a woman in America, living with male entitlement to our bodies." Pretty powerful stuff. And the last one is, you may or may not know, I'm not sure whether it was well received in Australia as a news item, but Harrison Butker, who's a pro-US footballer, recently gave a commencement speech which garnered considerable press. These are some quotes, direct quotes from his speech, and I'd like you to be the judge. One of the things that he said was, "I think it is you, the women, who have had the most diabolical lies told to you. The majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children you will bring into this world. My beautiful wife would be the first to say that her life truly started when she began living her vocation as a wife and as a mother, and embraced one of the most important titles of all, homemaker. I am hopeful that these words will be seen as those from a man who feels it imperative that this class, this generation, and this time in our society must stop pretending that the things we see around us are normal. As men, we set the tone of the culture, and when that is absent, disorder, dysfunction, and chaos set in. Be unapologetic in your masculinity, fighting against the cultural emasculation of men. All of this experience in the US reminded me of Julia Gillard's words in her latest book, Not Now, Not Ever. My inclusion of this information does not represent a political statement. It reflects the growing right-wing misogyny and extremism in the US and elsewhere across the world, and the danger it poses to women and gender equity. Because when women look up, they see a glass ceiling, and at the same time, the floor they stand on feels wobbly because hard-won advances, including reproductive rights, can be taken away, and they have been here in the US. So in reconnecting with and immersing myself in the discourse of my PhD study a few weeks ago, I was initially overwhelmed by how far I had come, how far back I had to go, and how much more I had to do, to redo and undo. My personal story and the shifts have contributed to this feeling of overwhelmedness. So without knowing, I had entered my state of hush. State of hush, you might ask, what an uncommon phrase. I learned of this state when invited by my supervisors, Marianne and Liz, to write uncensored, using I and reading additional feminist authors and philosophers. Through this, I came to know that I was in my state of hush. In reading Liz McKinley more closely than I had read before, I uncovered that the origins of hush was, in fact, hüst, which originally meant a low call to silence or for silence. Hüst had lost the T, and more meaningfully, it's I, meaningful to me, that is. So like hüst, I was in a profound state of loss of my PhD self and experiencing a low call for silence. And as I read, my feminist response and sensibilities, thanks again, Liz, were evoked. So let's now look at the third impact, which had contributed greatly to my state of loss, my call for silence. My analysis had become more than problematic. Early in my discussion with my PhD supervisors, as I've just mentioned, when I returned to my PhD, I raised the issue of locating how to conduct my analysis, my FPDA, my post-structuralist discourse analysis. I asked, I'm having trouble trying to locate the format, the structure, the design of what FPDA is. I can't find a formula of how to do it. And so I read and I write and I write and I read as recommended by my supervisors. And I began to embody my feminist response and sensibilities in the margins of the margins, where I am being called softly to silence within the discourse of my discourse. I read voraciously Lather, Richardson, McClure, McKinley, Whedon, St. Pierre, etc., etc. And at first thinking, what the hell are they talking about? None of this makes sense to me. Until I realize I'm coming to know, not reading to tell, as Richardson explores. Then I realised I was erroneously attempting to configure a very fixed, perfunctory and conventional method of analysis for reflexive and deconstruction purposes. And as I approach philosophers like Derrida, again, but differently, Wheel and Deleuze and Guattari, my desire to that which is fixed, perfunctory and conventional is almost magically dispelled, and freedom in analysis appears. I no longer need to look for the intentional or that which is potentially artifice. Or, as Derrida says, deconstruction is not nearly necessarily intentional, it is what happens, an outcome of the way language undoes itself. So what does this mean for my study? What does it mean for my PhD? My reading and writing were leading me to the post-post. You might ask, what do I mean by this? And for those of you who have been through this in terms of your own qualitative study using feminist post-structuralism, excuse the exuberance of my faltering steps towards knowing. Perhaps some insight into key ideas from my reading and writing will assist. And yes, I know what you're about to see breaks all the rules of how to conduct a presentation, but we've only got very limited time. So the post of post theory is the post that configures itself into a new understanding of post-structuralism and postmodernism, of deconstruction, of post-feminism and post-qualitative methodology. I don't expect you to read all these but in total they offer some insight into the extensive feminist post-writing that exists. And singularly, they evoke a sense of the different thinking where we are asked to look beyond educational and traditional feminist thinking. So I'm not overwhelmed. I'm being asked to pay attention to the radical entanglement rooted in the social, material, ontological, epistemological, and temporal location. I'm essentializing my feminist auto-ethnographic moment as my hush, as my low call to silence. This is my moment of precarity, where research and writing itself is now on precarious ground. I'm being called to my connectedness, situatedness, and perhaps even rootedness, the latter perhaps for the first time. For I have been looking for answers rather than questions, for the telling embedded in the answers rather than the questions which will lead me to knowing, as Laurel Richardson describes, or which become Paddy Laver's productivity of language. I have to, as Liz McKinley suggests, write myself back to life. This is the forceful stillness of discovery that affords me impact, calling me to press closely as it kindly urges me towards a more loving and responsible relationship as a researcher. It's the call to be rooted in the worlds I seek to word and the words I use to world. I am lost, yes, but in a forceful stillness of the discovery of knowing. In fact, it calls me to press closely to honour the asymmetry of feminism rather than the binary of oppositions, and which is the rich ground, as Laver refers to, from which I will ask my questions, create Derridian-style texture from interruptions, and generate that which is multiples, non-linear and connected. So getting lost as I have been is a post-structural way of knowing. I am claiming getting lost as a methodology, and where my journey of thinking differently begins with a non-perfunctory or conventional end in sight. My very linear model has been played with. Feminist post-structuralism makes way for post-feminist post-structuralism, using post-qualitative methodology through post-feminist storing. By pressing closely, the productivity of language will be produced through the discourses and the analysis using the post-qualitative method of getting lost, creating a non-totalizing explanatory framework, contributing to the productivity of language, whereby the production of different knowledge takes place, as well as producing knowledge differently. To see what this means requires you to wait for my thesis, because I am still lost. What I know is that which Helen Suzhou states. The only book, and I'm going to use the word thesis, that is worth writing is the one we don't have the courage or strength to write. The thesis that hurts us. Writing is writing what you cannot know before you have written it. A thesis stronger than the author. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennise. That was a really rich and literate presentation for sure. And for years, I've been waiting for someone to deconstruct Derrida, and I was always wondering what you're going to call what followed post-structuralism. So that was fantastic. How simple, post-structuralism. Could I take some questions from the audience, please? Alison.
Hi, Dennise, Alison here. Look, congratulations on a powerful presentation. As a fellow feminist post-structuralist, I can see that your work has really progressed in leaps and bounds from last year. So well done. We always look forward to your presentations, and I really wish you all the best with your health. And thank you for sharing. It was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any further questions from the, yes.
Hi, Dennise. My name is Richard. Thank you for your presentation. And first and foremost, I wish you health and wellness.
Thank you.
I want to understand something about your state of hush. It resonates with me a bit, I think, although I'm not sure it's quite what you were referring to. Your state of hush, does it refer to this feeling that in discussing some of these other works, other writers, other ideas and thoughts, your own voice kind of gets lost in that? So you end up writing a lot of material which is quite compelling and conducive and perhaps even correct, but you read it back and maybe your supervisors say, but I don't hear your voice in the mix here. Is that what sort of then you describe as a state of hush? Because I certainly have felt that myself.
I think you raise a really good point. Mine was really relevant to where I was. I came back out literally after 12 months of heavy duty chemo with chemo brain, and I just didn't know where to start. I didn't know you know what I was reading. I couldn't even understand, let alone understanding philosophy and understanding some of the feminist writers. I couldn't even understand my own writing. So I just really felt lost. But it is about, you are correct. For me, it was the ability to find my voice, because I had this idea in my head that I was writing to an academic style. And because I was writing to an academic style, I think there was a part of me that was absolutely being lost. And so when it was suggested that I do some of this different reading to what I had been doing, and you can probably see by some of the books on the back and the 30 or so that are around me on the desk, I've been doing a lot of reading. Well, I have been doing it over the course of the 3 years. And what I realized was that they suggested that I also write uncensored, as I said, and MVI. And once I got into it, I realized so much more. And Liz actually and Marianne, they pointed out to me that sometimes it's in the writing, when you're actually just writing uncensored, even though I was putting lots of ideas into it, what was coming, and I describe it in my writing, over my back, my left shoulder, and it was being pushed forward. And it was that movement where all the richness takes place, and I found that. And so I started to accept that I don't have to be, academic writing doesn't have to be staid and boring, and it doesn't have to be perfunctory. It can actually get you to the answers by the questions that you ask, and by allowing yourself the freedom to think, so that you aren't telling the story necessarily, but it's coming to know your story. Does that help?
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks a lot. We've got lots of nods of approval from, and particularly for Richard. It's a great question, Richard. I wish I could have thought of something like that myself. Anyway, it's time to move on. So look, thank you very much, Dennise. We all wish you well, and we hope to see you again next year with a bit of luck, hey?
Oh, more than luck.
All right, okie dokie. Thanks a lot, Dennise.
Thank you. Bye-bye.